The crack of gunfire split the evening air as Gwendolyn Hart ducked behind the weathered barrel outside the saloon, her breath coming in ragged gasps. It wasn't supposed to end like this, her life in Denver, her marriage to a banker who'd turned out to be both a gambler and a brute. And now her desperate flight across the Colorado Territory in the year 1875. Her silk dress, once a symbol of her station, was now torn and stained with the dust of the frontier town of Redemption Springs. Tears streamed down her face as another bullet splintered the wood just inches from her head. The men her husband had sent would not rest until they found her or what remained of her reputation. Gwendolyn closed her eyes, certain these would be her final moments when the thunder of hooves drowned out the gunfire. "Get down." A deep voice commanded as a tall figure leapt from his horse, drawing his revolver in one fluid motion. 3 shots rang out in quick succession, followed by shouts and the sound of retreating horses. Trembling, Gwendolyn looked up at her savior. Dust-covered boots led to worn denim, a leather vest over a cotton shirt, and finally to a face weathered by sun and hardship, yet somehow still youthful beneath a wide-brimmed hat. His eyes, blue as the Colorado sky, regarded her with concern. "Are you hurt, madam?" he asked, holstering his weapon and extending a calloused hand. "And no," she managed, taking his hand and rising shakily to her feet. "Thank you, Mr. Xander Reed," he replied, tipping his hat. "Most folks just call me X." "Gwendolyn Hart," she said, attempting to straighten her disheveled appearance. "Though I suppose it's back to Gwendolyn McIntyre now." The bitterness in her voice was unmistakable. "Those men," Xander said, glancing in the direction they'd fled, "they after you for a reason I should know about." Gwendolyn hesitated, shame coloring her cheeks. "My former husband believes I've stolen from him. I haven't, but Harold has connections and money enough to make people believe whatever he wishes." Xander studied her face for a long moment, as if assessing the truth of her words. "Well, Miss McIntyre, those men will likely return with reinforcements. You got somewhere safe to go?" The question hung in the air as reality crashed over her. She had nowhere, no one. She'd used the last of her funds to reach this dusty outpost, hoping to lose herself in the vastness of the West. "I thought so," Xander said softly, reading the answer in her silence. "My ranch is about an hour's ride from here. My sister Grace lives there too. You'd be safe until we figure things out." "Why would you help me?" Gwendolyn asked, suspicion creeping into her voice. Experience had taught her that men rarely offered assistance without expecting something in return. Xander's expression softened. "My ma raised me to believe a person in need is a chance to do right by the world, nothing more complicated than that." Something in his straightforward manner made Gwendolyn want to trust him, despite every instinct screaming caution. "I don't deserve such kindness," she whispered, barely audible over the evening breeze. Xander's lips curved into a gentle smile. "Maybe it's not about deserving, Miss McIntyre. Sometimes help comes when we need it, not when we think we've earned it." With nowhere else to turn and the threat of Harold's men looming, Gwendolyn found herself perched on Xander's horse, her arms tentatively wrapped around his waist as they rode through the gathering dusk toward the promise of sanctuary. The Reed Ranch emerged from the darkness like a beacon, a modest but well-maintained homestead with a main house, barn, and corral spread across a valley nestled between protective ridges. As they approached, a figure emerged onto the porch, rifle at the ready. "It's just me, Grace," Xander called out, slowing his horse to a walk. The woman lowered her weapon, her posture relaxing. "You're late, X. I was starting to worry." Her eyes fell on Gwendolyn. "And you've brought company." After dismounting and helping Gwendolyn down, Xander quickly explained the situation. Grace Reed, a woman perhaps a few years younger than Gwendolyn with the same clear blue eyes as her brother, listened intently before stepping forward with a warm smile. "Well, any woman running from a no-good husband is welcome here," she said, extending her hand. "Come inside. You look like you could use a hot meal and a place to rest." The Reed home was modest, but comfortable, a far cry from the opulent Denver mansion Gwendolyn had left behind. yet somehow more welcoming than that cold palace had ever been. Over a simple but hearty meal of venison stew and fresh baked bread, Gwendolyn found herself sharing more of her story than she'd intended. Harold seemed so charming at first, she explained, staring into her mug of coffee. My father had just passed, the family business was failing, and Harold appeared like salvation itself. Only after we were married did I discover his gambling debts, his drinking, his temper. Men like that, Grace said with quiet fury, they should be hung from the nearest tree. Grace, Xander warned, though his own expression had hardened. Gwendolyn continued, when I found evidence he was embezzling from his bank clients, he became dangerous. I fled with nothing but the clothes on my back and a small locket my mother left me. He's convinced I took documents that could incriminate him. He'll never stop looking. Xander exchanged a glance with his sister. Well, Redemption Springs is a small town, but folks here mind their own business. You can stay as long as you need. I couldn't impose, Gwendolyn began. Nonsense, Grace interrupted. The spare room is yours. Besides, X could use the help around here. I've been trying to convince him to hire someone since old Jeremiah moved back east, but he's too stubborn. Xander shot his sister an exasperated look. I manage just fine. You work yourself to exhaustion, Grace countered, and the cattle drive is coming up. Gwendolyn looked between them, uncomfortable at being the center of their dispute. I don't know the first thing about ranch work, she admitted. Xander's expression softened. Can you cook? Yes, she replied hesitantly. Though I'm not sure my skills would impress after sampling your sister's cooking. Grace laughed, a bright sound that seemed to lighten the room. Flattery will get you everywhere, Gwendolyn. But I've been meaning to spend more time with my garden and my herbal remedies. Having someone else manage the kitchen would be a blessing. And just like that, Gwendolyn found herself with a temporary home and purpose. As Grace showed her to the spare room, small but clean, with a quilt-covered bed and a window overlooking the valley, she felt the first stirrings of hope since her desperate flight from Denver. Thank you, she said as Grace placed a nightgown and fresh towel on the bed. Both of you. I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness, Grace shook her head. X has always had a soft spot for strays and lost causes, been that way since we were kids. She smiled fondly. Rest now, tomorrow's soon enough to worry about what comes next. After Grace left, Gwendolyn sank onto the bed, exhaustion finally claiming her. Through the thin walls, she could hear the siblings' muted conversation. You sure about this, X? Grace was asking. If those men come looking, then we'll deal with it, came Xander's firm reply. I couldn't leave her there, Grace. You didn't see her eyes like a wounded doe about to bolt. Always the protector, Grace sighed, though there was affection in her voice. Just be careful, women with pasts have a way of complicating things. Don't we all have pasts? Xander responded quietly. Gwendolyn closed her eyes, shame washing over her anew. She was bringing danger to these good people's doorstep. In the morning, perhaps she should continue on, find somewhere else to hide. But as sleep claimed her, one thought lingered. For the first time in months, she felt safe. The following days established a routine that brought unexpected comfort to Gwendolyn's fractured life. She rose early, preparing breakfast for Xander before he headed out to work the cattle, and for Grace before she tended her extensive herb garden. The rest of her day was spent learning the rhythms of ranch life, collecting eggs from the henhouse, baking bread in the wood stove, preserving the vegetables Grace harvested. A week passed, then two. Gwendolyn's city soft hands grew calloused, her pale complexion tanned by the Colorado sun. The nightmares of Harold's rage gradually receded, replaced by dreamless exhaustion after days of honest work. She learned more about the Reed siblings, too. They had inherited the ranch 5 years earlier when their parents died in a flash flood. Xander had abandoned his plans to study law in Boston, returning to take over the family business. Grace, who had been training as a nurse, came home to help her brother. Together, they had turned the modest operation into one of the more successful small ranches in the territory. It was during the third week when Gwendolyn truly began to see Xander as more than her benefactor. She had ventured to the corral where he was breaking a spirited young stallion, bringing him a canteen of water. The sight of his shirt clinging to his muscled form with sweat, his movements both powerful and gentle as he worked with the nervous animal, stirred something within her she thought Harold's cruelty had destroyed forever. "You have a way with him," she remarked, handing over the water. Xander drank deeply before responding. Horses are honest creatures. They respond to patience and consistency. He patted the stallion's neck. "This one's been mistreated before, makes him wary but not mean. He'll come around." The parallel to her own situation wasn't lost on Gwendolyn. "Do all broken things deserve such patience?" Xander's gaze met hers, those blue eyes seeming to peer straight into her soul. "Broken isn't the same as worthless, Gwen." It was the first time he'd shortened her name, the informality creating an unexpected intimacy between them. Flustered, she changed the subject. "Grace mentioned a town social this weekend. Will you be attending?" Xander grimaced. "Not if I can help it. Those things always end with Widow Jenkins trying to match me with her niece or the Stillwater twins competing for a dance." Gwendolyn laughed, the sound surprising her. When had she last laughed freely? "Quite the local catch, are you?" "Hardly," he snorted. "Just one of the few unmarried men under 40 who owns land and doesn't smell like whiskey most days." He hesitated. "Would you like to go?" "Grace usually enjoys those gatherings." "I shouldn't," Gwendolyn replied, sobering. "If Harold's men are still looking, being seen in town would be foolish." Xander studied her for a moment. "You can't hide forever, Gwen." "Can't I?" she challenged, a familiar bitterness creeping into her voice. "You don't know Harold. His pride won't let this go, especially if he thinks I have evidence of his crimes." "Do you have evidence?" Gwendolyn hesitated. "Not anymore. I burned the papers before I left Denver, but he doesn't know that." Xander nodded thoughtfully. "All the more reason to start building a life here, out in the open. The longer you're known as part of this community, the harder it'll be for him to simply snatch you away." The logic was sound, but fear still gripped her heart. "I've put you and Grace at enough risk already." "That's our choice to make," Xander said firmly. "Besides, I'd like to see these men of his try something on Reed land." The protective edge in his voice sent an unexpected thrill through her. That evening, as Grace excitedly planned what they would wear to the social, Gwendolyn found herself caught between terror and a strange anticipation. The prospect of stepping back into society, even frontier society, was daunting. Yet the thought of entering that hall on Xander Reed's arm stirred emotions she'd long suppressed. Saturday arrived clear and warm. Grace had altered one of her dresses for Gwendolyn, a simple blue cotton that complemented her eyes. As they prepared, Grace chattered happily about the local families Gwendolyn would meet, the music, the food. "And Reverend Wilson has been asking after you," Grace mentioned casually as she helped pin Gwendolyn's hair. "He's quite intrigued by X's mysterious houseguest." Gwendolyn tensed. "What have people been saying?" "Nothing malicious," Grace assured her. "X told folks you're a friend of the family fallen on hard times. People respect him enough not to pry too deeply." When they descended to the main room, Xander was waiting, freshly shaved and dressed in clean clothes that transformed the rugged rancher into a surprisingly handsome gentleman. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of Gwendolyn, a reaction that sent a flush of pleasure through her. "You ladies look lovely," he said, offering an arm to each of them. "Shall we brave the gossips of Redemption Springs?" The social was held in the town's newly constructed meeting hall, a simple wooden structure decorated with wildflowers and lanterns for the occasion. As they entered, Gwendolyn felt dozens of curious eyes turned toward her. She tightened her grip on Xander's arm. "Breathe," he murmured close to her ear. "You're doing fine." The evening progressed better than Gwendolyn had feared. Grace introduced her to several friendly women who welcomed her without pressing for details about her past. Xander stayed nearby, his solid presence a comfort as she navigated the social currents of her new community. When the fiddle players struck up a lively tune, couples took to the cleared floor space. "Dance with me," Xander asked, extending his hand. Gwendolyn hesitated. "I'm not sure I remember how." "Neither do I," he admitted with a grin. "We'll look foolish together." Something about his easy confidence made it impossible to refuse. As he led her through the steps of the country dance, Gwendolyn felt a lightness she'd thought forever lost. Xander moved with surprising grace for such a large man, guiding her through turns and promenades with gentle pressure on her waist or hand. During a particularly energetic section, he pulled her close to avoid collision with another couple. For a breathless moment, their faces were inches apart, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her heart race. The spell was broken by a commotion at the door. Sheriff Donovan, a grizzled veteran of both the Mexican and Civil Wars, was striding purposefully toward them, his expression grim. "Reed," he said without preamble, "need a word." Xander excused himself, following the lawman to a quiet corner. Gwendolyn watched anxiously as they conversed, Xander's posture growing increasingly tense. When he returned, his face was carefully neutral, but she could see the concern in his eyes. "We should head back to the ranch," he said quietly. "What's happened?" Grace asked, joining them. Sheriffs had reports of strangers asking questions about a woman matching Gwen's description over in Silverdale, Xander explained, already guiding them toward the exit. "Could be nothing, but I'd rather not take chances." The ride home was tense and silent. Only when they were safely inside, doors locked and curtains drawn, did Gwendolyn allow her composure to crumble. "I knew this would happen," she whispered, tears threatening. "I've brought this danger to your door." "I should leave, head further west. You'll do no such thing," Xander interrupted, his voice firm. "Running alone makes you vulnerable. Here you have people who will stand with you." "But why?" Gwendolyn cried, her frustration boiling over. "Why risk yourselves for someone you barely know?" "I don't deserve such loyalty. I don't deserve love," she said, the words escaping before she could stop them. Xander stepped closer, his eyes burning with an emotion she couldn't name. "Then let me love you until you believe it," he said softly. The room fell silent, the only sound the crackling of the fire and their ragged breathing. Had he truly said those words, or was it her imagination? Grace cleared her throat. "I'll, check that the back door is secured," she murmured, tactfully leaving them alone. Gwendolyn stared at Xander, uncertain how to respond. "You can't mean that," she finally whispered. "You don't know me, not really?" "I know enough," he countered, reaching out to brush a tear from her cheek. "I know you're brave enough to flee a monster rather than remain his victim. I know you work hard without complaint. I know you laugh at Grace's terrible jokes and sing to yourself when you think no one's listening." His thumb traced the line of her jaw. "I know that in the few weeks you've been here, this house has felt more like a home than it has in years." Gwendolyn's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. "Xander, I'm still married in the eyes of the law." "I know," he sighed, dropping his hand, "and I won't dishonor you by suggesting otherwise. But when this is resolved, and it will be resolved, I want you to know there's a place for you here, not as our cook or helper, but as—" "As what?" she prompted when he faltered. "As whatever you want to be," he finished. "The choice will be yours, Gwen, always yours." In that moment, Gwendolyn realized how different Xander was from Harold. Where her husband had demanded and taken, Xander offered and waited. Where Harold had seen her as a possession, Xander saw her as a person deserving of choice. Before she could respond, Grace burst back into the room, her face pale. "Riders coming," she announced. "At least 4, moving fast." Xander's expression hardened as he moved to the gun cabinet, extracting his rifle and checking it was loaded. "Grace, take Gwen to the cellar. Use the tunnel if you need to." "What tunnel?" Gwendolyn asked, confused. "Our father was a cautious man," Grace explained, already pulling her toward the kitchen. "Dug an escape route during the border troubles, comes out in the grove beyond the north pasture." "I'm not hiding while you face danger on my behalf," Gwendolyn protested, turning to Xander. "This is my fight." "It's our fight now," he corrected, handing Grace a revolver. "But we fight smart. If these are Hart's men, they want you, not us. Let them think you've already moved on." Logic prevailed over pride, and Gwendolyn allowed Grace to guide her to the cellar. As they descended the narrow stairs, she heard the front door open and Xander's voice, deliberately loud and casual, greeting the newcomers. The cellar was cool and dark, smelling of earth and preserved foods. Grace lit a small lantern, illuminating rows of canned goods and a heavy trapdoor in the far corner. "That's the tunnel," she whispered. "If you hear shooting or if X gives the signal, 3 short whistles, we go through, no arguments." Gwendolyn nodded, straining to hear the conversation above. The floorboards creaked as multiple sets of boots moved across them, but the voices were too muffled to make out clearly. Minutes stretched like hours as they waited in tense silence. Occasionally, a louder voice would penetrate someone growing angry, then being calmed. Grace clutched the revolver, her knuckles white. Finally, they heard the front door open again, followed by retreating hoofbeats. Still, they waited, hearts pounding, until the cellar door opened and Xander appeared at the top of the stairs. "It's clear," he said, his face grim. "But we have a problem." Upstairs, Xander poured 3 glasses of whiskey, an unusual indulgence that signaled the seriousness of the situation. 4 men, he explained, not local. They claimed to be U.S. Marshals with a warrant for the arrest of Gwendolyn Hart on charges of theft and attempted murder. "Murder?" Gwendolyn gasped. "That's absurd. I never." "Harold is claiming you tried to poison him before fleeing with bank documents and family heirlooms," Xander continued. "They had a photograph of you and official-looking papers. Were they actually marshals?" Grace asked skeptically. Xander shrugged. "Sheriff Donovan will confirm with the federal office in Denver, but it'll take time. Meanwhile, I told them I'd hired a woman briefly who matched the description, but she'd moved on toward California weeks ago." "Did they believe you?" Gwendolyn asked. "Not entirely," he admitted. "They'll be watching the ranch and asking around town. But most folks here won't cooperate with outsiders easily." Gwendolyn sank into a chair, despair washing over her. "He's framing me for attempted murder. God, I should have known he'd go this far." "This changes things," Grace said quietly, "if they're actual marshals." "Then helping me makes you accessories," Gwendolyn finished. "I can't ask that of you. I'll turn myself in, explain." "No," Xander interrupted firmly. "Harold has influence in Denver. You'd never get a fair hearing, especially with false charges." "Then what?" Gwendolyn cried. "I can't hide forever, and I won't let you both become fugitives on my account." Xander paced the room, thinking. "We need evidence of Harold's crimes, something to counter his accusations. You said you burned the papers you had." Gwendolyn nodded miserably. "I was afraid of being caught with them." They detailed his embezzlement scheme, which clients he was stealing from, how he was covering it. "What about other victims?" Grace suggested. "Surely you weren't the first woman he mistreated." A memory stirred in Gwendolyn's mind. There was his first wife, Elizabeth. "The story was that she ran off with another man, but I found letters once. Harold was furious when he caught me reading them." "Where would we find this Elizabeth?" Xander asked. "I don't know," Gwendolyn admitted. "The letters were from Kansas City, but they were several years old." Xander nodded thoughtfully. "I have a contact, their old Army friend. He could make inquiries." He turned to Grace. "The cattle drive to Denver leaves in 3 days. I could detour to Kansas City afterward." "And leave us here with those men watching the ranch," Grace protested. "I'll speak with Sheriff Donovan tomorrow. Make sure he keeps an eye on things," Xander assured her. "And Gwen needs to stay out of sight completely. No more town visits, no working outside where she might be spotted." The plan, tenuous as it was, gave Gwendolyn the first glimmer of hope. If they could find Elizabeth, if she was willing to speak about Harold's true nature, if the embezzlement could be proven. So many ifs, but it was better than surrender or endless hiding. That night, as the house finally quieted, Gwendolyn found sleep elusive. Sometime past midnight, she gave up trying and made her way to the kitchen for a glass of water. To her surprise, Xander was there, seated at the table with a cup of coffee and a well-worn ledger. "You should rest," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. He looked up, a tired smile crossing his features. "So should you." Gwendolyn poured herself water and hesitated before taking the seat across from him. "What are you working on so late?" "Finances for the cattle drive," he replied, pushing the ledger aside. "Making sure everything's in order before I leave." The reminder of his impending departure sent a pang through her chest. Despite the danger that had followed her, these weeks at the Reed Ranch had been the most peaceful of her adult life. Much of that peace, she now realized, came from Xander's steady presence. I never thanked you properly, she said. For everything you've done, for what you're about to risk. Xander shook his head. No thanks needed, I told you. I know what you told me, Gwendolyn interrupted gently. About loving me until I believe I deserve it. Did you mean that? His eyes met hers, unwavering. Every word. Gwendolyn's throat tightened with emotion. How can you be so certain? We've known each other such a short time. Some things don't need time, he replied simply. Sometimes you just know. She wanted desperately to believe him, to accept the promise in his eyes, but fear still held her back. What if you're wrong about me? What if I'm not worth the risk you're taking? Xander reached across the table, his hand covering hers. Then that's my mistake to make. But I don't think I am wrong, Gwen. The warmth of his touch, the sincerity in his voice, the quiet strength he radiated, all of it weakened her carefully constructed defenses. Before she could overthink it, Gwendolyn leaned across the table and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was brief, chaste even, but it sent a shock through her system, awakening feelings she'd thought permanently extinguished. When she pulled back, Xander's expression was a mixture of surprise and unmistakable joy. I shouldn't have done that, she whispered, though she couldn't bring herself to regret it. Probably not, he agreed, a smile tugging at his lips. But I'm glad you did. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the air between them charged with possibilities. Then reality reasserted itself. When this is over, Xander said softly, when you're truly free, we'll have time to explore whatever this is between us. Until then, we focus on surviving, Gwendolyn finished for him. She returned to her room shortly after, but sleep remained elusive. Instead, her mind filled with thoughts of Xander, his kindness, his integrity, the feeling of his lips against hers, and for the first time in years, Gwendolyn allowed herself to hope for a future that might include happiness. The next 2 days passed in a flurry of preparation for Xander's departure. The cattle drive would take him away for at least 3 weeks longer if his detour to Kansas City proved fruitful. Sheriff Donovan confirmed he would keep an extra eye on the ranch, and several neighboring ranchers, friends of the Reed family, promised to check in regularly. On the morning of Xander's departure, Gwendolyn rose before dawn to prepare his favorite breakfast, sourdough biscuits with bacon, gravy, and strong coffee. As they ate, the conversation was carefully casual, avoiding mention of the real purpose of his journey or the dangers that might lie ahead. Grace excused herself to prepare additional provisions for his saddlebags, leaving them momentarily alone. Be careful, Gwendolyn said, abandoning pretense. If anything happened to you because of me, nothing will happen, Xander assured her. I'll find Elizabeth if she's to be found, and I'll be back before you know it. He hesitated, then added, Wait for me, Gwen. No matter what happens, promise you won't run. I promise, she replied, holding his gaze. Just come back safely. When the time came for goodbyes, Gwendolyn remained hidden inside as Xander departed with his trail crew. From the window, she watched his tall figure mount up, his final words to Grace, the backward glance toward the house where he knew she was watching. Then he was gone, disappearing down the trail with 20 cowboys and several hundred head of cattle. The ranch felt emptier in his absence. Though Grace was good company and the two women had developed a genuine friendship, they both felt the void Xander left behind. To fill the time and keep worry at bay, they threw themselves into work preserving the late summer harvest, mending winter clothes, deep cleaning rooms that had been neglected. A week passed without incident. The men claiming to be marshals made one more visit to the ranch, but left after a brief conversation with Grace. Sheriff Donovan reported they were still in the area, asking questions in nearby towns, but seemed to be following the false trail Xander had laid, suggesting Gwendolyn had headed west. It was during the second week that trouble arrived in an unexpected form. Grace had ridden into town for supplies, leaving Gwendolyn alone at the ranch with strict instructions to stay inside and away from windows. She was kneading bread dough when a knock at the door startled her into stillness. No one should be visiting. Sheriff Donovan always called out his presence, and Grace would simply enter. Heart pounding, Gwendolyn wiped her hands and moved silently to the rifle Xander had left for emergencies. Through a small gap in the curtains, she peered out. A woman stood on the porch well-dressed, middle-aged, with an air of refinement that seemed out of place in the frontier setting. Behind her waited a carriage with a hired driver. She didn't appear threatening, but Gwendolyn remained wary. "Hello," the woman called. "Is anyone home?" "I'm looking for Xander Reed." Something about the woman's voice, the accent perhaps, or the cultured tone triggered a memory. Gwendolyn had heard that voice before at society gatherings in Denver. With growing dread, she realized who the visitor must be. Steadying herself, she opened the door just enough to see clearly, keeping the rifle hidden behind it. "Mr. Reed is away on business," she said cautiously. "I'm afraid he won't return for some time." The woman's eyes widened in recognition. "Gwendolyn Hart," she breathed. "So it's true." "You are here. Who are you?" Gwendolyn demanded, though she already suspected. "Margaret Thornton," the woman replied. "Harold's sister. May I come in? I believe we have much to discuss." Every instinct screamed danger, but curiosity overrode caution. If Harold had sent his sister rather than more hired men, perhaps there was information to be gained. Reluctantly, Gwendolyn stepped back, allowing Margaret entry while keeping the rifle visible as warning. "You'll forgive my caution," Gwendolyn said coldly. "Your brother's previous emissaries weren't exactly peaceful," Margaret sighed, removing her gloves as she took in the modest ranch house. "Harold always did prefer brute force to diplomacy, a failing I've chided him for repeatedly." She turned to face Gwendolyn directly. "I'm not here on his behalf, though he believes I am. I came to warn you." "Warn me," Gwendolyn repeated skeptically. "The men looking for you aren't U.S. Marshals," Margaret explained. "They're Pinkerton agents hired by Harold. The charges against you are fabricated, but the warrant is real enough. Harold has a judge in his pocket." Gwendolyn's grip on the rifle tightened. "Why are you telling me this? Why betray your brother?" A shadow passed over Margaret's face. "Because I failed Elizabeth. I won't have another woman's blood on my conscience." "Elizabeth," Gwendolyn whispered. "Harold's first wife. What happened to her?" Margaret sank into a chair, suddenly looking older. "The official story is that she ran away with a lover. The truth is she fled just as you did when she discovered Harold's criminal dealings. He found her in Kansas City." Margaret's voice faltered. "They called it suicide. I knew better." Horror washed over Gwendolyn as the implications became clear. "He killed her. He made sure she was found in a compromising situation with enough laudanum in her system to suggest she took her own life out of shame," Margaret confirmed. "I suspected, but could never prove it. When he married you, I told myself he had changed." "And now?" Gwendolyn asked. "Now I know he'll never change. When I heard what he was planning for you." Margaret shuddered. "I couldn't be silent again." Gwendolyn's mind raced. If what Margaret said was true, Xander was riding into greater danger than any of them had anticipated. And if Harold had the law in his pocket, even legitimate evidence might not be enough. "Where is Harold now?" she asked urgently. "Denver, maintaining appearances," Margaret replied. "But he's impatient. The Pinkerton men have orders to bring you back by any means necessary, and if your friend interferes, they're authorized to eliminate the obstacle." Cold fear gripped Gwendolyn's heart. "Xander's gone to Kansas City looking for Elizabeth. If they're following him, then he's walking into a trap," Margaret finished grimly. "Harold has contacts there who would recognize inquiries about Elizabeth immediately." The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted their conversation. Gwendolyn moved to the window, relieved to see Grace returning alone. "That's Xander's sister," she explained to Margaret. "She should hear this too." The next hour was spent in intense discussion as Margaret revealed everything she knew about Harold's operations, his connections, and the extent of his crimes. Grace, initially suspicious, became convinced of Margaret's sincerity as details emerged that matched what little Gwendolyn had previously shared. "We need to warn X," Grace insisted. "If these Pinkerton men are following him, a telegram to Kansas City might reach him," Margaret suggested. "I know which hotel he uses when they're on business." Gwendolyn shook her head. "A telegram could be intercepted. Someone needs to go in person." She met Grace's eyes. "I have to go." "Absolutely not," Grace protested. "You'd be walking right into Harold's territory." "No one would expect me to return to Missouri," Gwendolyn argued. And I know Kansas City well enough to move carefully. Besides, Harold thinks I'm heading west thanks to Xander's misdirection. Margaret considered this. She's not wrong. The Pinkertons have shifted their search toward California. If she traveled with me, using my name and connections, we might reach Kansas City undetected. It's too dangerous, Grace insisted. More dangerous than letting Xander walk blindly into Harold's web, Gwendolyn countered. I won't sit safely here while he risks his life on my behalf. The determination in her voice must have resonated with Grace, who recognized the same stubborn loyalty that characterized her brother. After further discussion and planning, a reluctant agreement was reached. Gwendolyn would travel with Margaret, posing as her companion, to intercept Xander in Kansas City. Grace would remain at the ranch to maintain appearances and coordinate with Sheriff Donovan, who would be informed of the true situation in strictest confidence. As evening fell, Gwendolyn packed a small bag with essentials, including the revolver Xander had taught her to use during quiet afternoons behind the barn. She changed from her simple ranch clothes into a traveling dress Margaret had brought, part of the disguise they hoped would shield her from recognition. "Are you certain about this?" Grace asked as they prepared to depart. "X would never forgive me if something happened to you." Gwendolyn embraced the woman who had become like a sister to her. "And I would never forgive myself if something happened to him because of me. This is my fight, Grace. It's time I stopped hiding and faced it." As Margaret's carriage pulled away from the ranch, Gwendolyn looked back at the place that had become more home to her than any mansion ever had. She silently vowed to return with Xander if fate was kind. The journey to Kansas City took 5 grueling days by carriage and train. Margaret proved to be an unexpected ally, her years of navigating society's treacherous waters making her adept at deflecting curiosity and creating plausible cover stories. By the time they reached Missouri, Gwendolyn had learned much about the woman who had been her sister-in-law, including her complicated relationship with Harold. "I've enabled him," Margaret admitted during a quiet moment on the train. "Made excuses, covered his indiscretions, even paid off people he'd wronged, all because he was my only living family." Her eyes, so like Harold's in color yet utterly different in expression, filled with regret. Family loyalty is a powerful force, but there are limits that should never be crossed. Upon arriving in Kansas City, they took rooms at a hotel different from the one Harold frequented, Margaret using an old friend's name to further obscure their presence. The city had grown significantly since Gwendolyn had last visited, the boom of westward expansion evident in new construction and bustling streets. Their first task was locating Xander without exposing themselves. Margaret suggested they begin by checking the hotel where the cattle buyers typically stayed during the seasonal drives. If he came with a legitimate herd, that's where the transactions would occur, she explained. We can make inquiries without revealing our purpose. Dressed in their finest, presenting themselves as a wealthy widow and her companion looking to invest in cattle futures, they visited the Grand Western Hotel. The clerk was appropriately deferential to Margaret's apparent status. "Reed, you say?" "Yes, madam, Mr. Reed completed his business 2 days ago. Fine herd from what I heard." Gwendolyn's heart leapt. "Is he still in the city?" The clerk checked his register. "Hasn't checked out yet, madam. Would you like me to send up a message?" "That won't be necessary," Margaret interjected smoothly. "We'll call again at a more appropriate hour. Did he happen to mention how long he intended to stay?" "Can't say that he did," the clerk replied. "Though he's been asking odd questions around town, something about a woman who lived here years back." Margaret thanked him with a generous tip and they departed quickly before further questions could arise. "He's here," Gwendolyn whispered as they stepped onto the street, "and still searching for Elizabeth." "Which means Harold's people know it too," Margaret said grimly. "We need to find him before they do." They decided to wait near the hotel, taking a table at a cafe across the street with a clear view of the entrance. Hours passed with no sign of Xander. As evening approached, Gwendolyn's anxiety grew. "Something's wrong," she murmured. "If he's still in the city, he should have returned by now." Margaret's expression was troubled. There's another possibility if Harold's men have already found him. The thought was too terrible to contemplate. Gwendolyn rose abruptly. I'm going to ask at the hotel again. Perhaps he left word about his plans. Before Margaret could protest, Gwendolyn was crossing the street, determination overriding caution. She had nearly reached the hotel when a familiar figure emerged from a side alley, tall, broad-shouldered, unmistakable even at a distance. Xander. She called without thinking. He turned, shock registering on his face as he recognized her. In 3 long strides he was before her, his hands gripping her upper arms. Gwen, what in God's name are you doing here? His voice was a mixture of disbelief and anger, but his eyes, those eyes that had looked at her with such tenderness, were filled with fear. Do you have any idea how dangerous? I came to warn you, she interrupted. Harold knows you're looking for Elizabeth. He sent men to stop you. Xander's expression darkened. Too late for warnings. I've already had the pleasure of meeting 2 of them. He glanced around the busy street. We can't talk here. Come with me. He led her back through the alley to a modest boarding house several blocks from the main hotel. As they hurried inside, Gwendolyn caught sight of Margaret following at a discreet distance. Xander's rented room was small but clean, with a narrow bed and simple furnishings. Only when the door was locked behind them did he turn to her, his face a storm of emotions. Explain, he demanded. Now. Gwendolyn did, recounting Margaret's unexpected arrival and revelations, the discovery about Elizabeth's true fate and their journey to find him. As she spoke, Xander's anger gave way to grim understanding. I reached similar conclusions, he said when she finished. Though without the confirmation about Elizabeth's death. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she recognized as one of frustration. I was attacked yesterday while making inquiries at a boarding house where she once stayed. 2 men, professional types. I managed to get away, but not before one of them made it clear they knew exactly who I was and why I was asking questions. Are you hurt? Gwendolyn asked, noticing for the first time the bruise darkening his jaw. Nothing serious, he dismissed. But it confirmed I was on the right track. Elizabeth did live here after leaving Harold, and she was gathering evidence against him, bank records, witness statements from other victims of his schemes. Evidence that died with her, Gwendolyn said softly. Not necessarily, Xander replied, a hint of triumph entering his voice. Before she died, Elizabeth sent copies of everything to a lawyer in St. Louis. I have his name and address. Hope surged through Gwendolyn. Then we have a chance. If we can get those documents. A knock at the door silenced her. Xander motioned for her to move behind him as he approached cautiously, hand moving to the gun at his hip. Who is it? He called. Margaret Thornton, came the reply. I believe we have mutual concerns regarding my brother. Xander glanced at Gwendolyn, who nodded confirmation. He opened the door just enough to verify Margaret's identity before allowing her inside. The 3 spent hours planning their next move. Margaret's knowledge of Harold's operations and connections proved invaluable, filling gaps in what Xander had discovered. By midnight, they had formulated a strategy. Xander and Gwendolyn would travel to St. Louis to retrieve Elizabeth's evidence while Margaret returned to Denver to gather additional proof of Harold's more recent crimes. He keeps a hidden safe in his study, Margaret explained. I've seen him access it when he thought no one was watching. If I can get those documents, it's too dangerous, Gwendolyn protested. If Harold suspects you've betrayed him, he won't, Margaret assured her. I've played the devoted sister for years. Besides, he's planning a business trip to Chicago next week. The house will be relatively empty. The plan set, they agreed to rendezvous in 2 weeks' time in a small town just outside Denver Territory Neutral Ground where they could assess their evidence before deciding how best to proceed against Harold. Morning came too quickly. After securing passage on an eastbound train to St. Louis, Xander and Gwendolyn bid farewell to Margaret, who would begin her journey back to Denver that same day. As the train pulled away from Kansas City, Gwendolyn found herself alone with Xander for the first time since their brief, charged moment in his kitchen. The private compartment Margaret had arranged for them under false names offered both security and an intimacy that heightened her awareness of him. You shouldn't have come, Xander said after long minutes of silence, though the anger had left his voice. "But I'm glad you did." Gwendolyn looked up from the book she'd been pretending to read. "You would have done the same for me. You have done the same for me many times over," he smiled faintly. "That's different. Because you're a man," she challenged, "or because my life is somehow worth more than yours?" "Because I love you," he said simply, "and that makes the risk worth taking." The words, spoken so plainly in the swaying compartment, stole her breath. They had danced around this truth, implied it in actions and hints, but never had he stated it so directly. "Xander," she began, uncertain how to respond. "You don't need to say anything," he assured her. "I'm not expecting declarations in return. I just want you to understand why I would risk everything to keep you safe. It's not obligation or chivalry or anything so impersonal. It's because in the short time I've known you, you've become essential to me." Gwendolyn moved from her seat to join him on the opposite bench, taking his hand in hers. "I crossed half a territory and risked capture to find you," she said softly. "What does that tell you about my feelings?" His free hand came up to cup her cheek. "It tells me you're either the bravest woman I've ever met or the most foolhardy." "Perhaps both," she admitted with a small smile, the moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. This time, it was Xander who closed the distance, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that began gently but quickly deepened with the release of weeks of restrained emotion. Gwendolyn felt herself responding with a passion she'd thought forever lost to her, a hunger not just for physical contact, but for the connection of two souls recognizing each other. When they finally parted, both breathless, she rested her forehead against his. "I do love you," she whispered. "I think I have since that first night when you saved me outside the saloon. I just couldn't believe someone like you could want someone as broken as me." "Not broken," he corrected, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Wounded, perhaps, healing definitely, but never broken." As the train carried them eastward, Gwendolyn allowed herself to believe, if only for these stolen hours, that a future with Xander might truly be possible. That the nightmare of her marriage to Harold might one day be just a distant memory, replaced by the reality of a love freely given and joyfully received. Sent. Louis greeted them with unseasonably warm autumn weather and streets crowded with commerce. After securing rooms at her respectable hotel, separate but adjoining, a compromise between propriety and practicality, they set out to locate the lawyer who held Elizabeth's documents. Thaddeus Wainwright's office was situated in a handsome brick building near the courthouse, the practice of a successful man, which gave them hope that Elizabeth's evidence had been treated with appropriate care. A young clerk showed them into a well-appointed office where Wainwright, a distinguished gentleman in his 60s, received them with courteous curiosity. "Reed and McIntyre," he mused, reviewing the card Xander had presented. "I don't believe we've had the pleasure. What brings you to my office?" Xander glanced at Gwendolyn, who nodded slightly. They had agreed that honesty would be their best approach with the lawyer. "Sir, my actual name is Gwendolyn Hart. I'm the current wife of Harold Hart of Denver." Wainwright's expression changed instantly, wariness replacing cordiality. "I see." "And your companion?" "Xander Reed, a friend who's helping me escape Harold's abuse," she replied. "We've come about Elizabeth Hart." The lawyer studied them for a long moment before rising to close his office door. "I haven't heard that name in years," he said quietly. "Not since I received word of her tragic death. A death we have reason to believe was murder, not suicide," Xander stated. Wainwright's eyebrows rose. "That is a serious accusation, Mr. Reed." "One we can substantiate," Gwendolyn said, "with the help of the documents Elizabeth entrusted to you." Understanding dawned in the lawyer's eyes. "You're in a similar situation to Elizabeth, running from Hart, seeking protection." "Yes," Gwendolyn confirmed, "and like her, I have knowledge of his crimes. Unlike her, I hope to live to see him brought to justice." Wainwright returned to his desk and unlocked a drawer, extracting a key. Elizabeth was a remarkable woman. Intelligent, brave, determined to expose Hart's operations despite the personal cost. When she came to me, she was already afraid for her life. He sighed heavily. I advised her to take her evidence to the federal authorities immediately, but she insisted on gathering more proof. She wanted an airtight case. A caution that cost her everything, Xander said grimly. Indeed, Wainwright stood again. The documents are not kept here. After her death, I deemed it safer to place them in a bank vault. If you'll accompany me, the bank was only a short walk from the lawyer's office. As they traversed the busy streets, Wainwright explained more about his relationship with Elizabeth. She came to me on the recommendation of a mutual acquaintance, a judge who had once presided in Denver. Elizabeth had discovered Hart's embezzlement scheme almost accidentally, but once aware, she methodically documented everything: names, dates, amounts. She also found evidence of earlier victims, women he had courted, married, or simply befriended for the purpose of accessing their finances. A pattern of behavior, Gwendolyn murmured, thinking of her own experience. Precisely, Wainwright agreed. Hart is not merely a thief but a predator who specifically targets vulnerable women with financial assets. At the bank, they were escorted to a private room after Wainwright presented his credentials. A clerk brought a metal box, which the lawyer opened once they were alone. Inside were several folders of papers, meticulously organized and annotated in a neat feminine hand. Gwendolyn recognized the same methodical thinking that had characterized Harold's household management, Elizabeth using her understanding of his systems against him. These detail financial crimes spanning nearly a decade, Wainwright explained, spreading the documents before them. Bank fraud, embezzlement, investment schemes targeting widows and unmarried women of means. And these, he indicated a separate folder, contained testimonies from 3 women who survived relationships with Hart. Their statements regarding his abuse, coercion, and threats might be useful in establishing a pattern of behavior. Xander examined the papers with growing satisfaction. This is more than enough to destroy him legally and socially. Perhaps, Wainwright cautioned, if properly presented to authorities not under his influence. Hart has friends in high places, as Elizabeth discovered to her detriment. We have a plan for that, Gwendolyn assured him. And additional evidence being gathered as we speak. After reviewing the documents thoroughly, they arranged for Wainwright to create certified copies of everything. The originals would remain in the vault, a precaution against loss or destruction. I failed Elizabeth, the lawyer said as they prepared to leave. I couldn't convince her to take stronger precautions. Please don't make the same mistake. Hart is dangerous precisely because he appears so respectable. We understand the risk, Xander affirmed, and we're not facing it alone. Armed with Elizabeth's evidence, they returned to their hotel to await the copies Wainwright had promised would be delivered the following morning. The success of their mission brought a cautious optimism, tempered by the knowledge that the most dangerous part of their plan still lay ahead. What happens after we meet Margaret? Gwendolyn asked as they shared a quiet dinner in her room, away from curious eyes in the hotel restaurant. Even with all this evidence, Harold still has influence. Xander considered the question. Sheriff Donovan has contacts in the territorial government, honest men who can't be bought. If we present our case there, bypass Denver's corrupt officials entirely. Harold would still come after us, Gwendolyn pointed out. Evidence or not, trial or not, he won't stop. Then we'll be ready, Xander said simply. But first, let's focus on getting safely to the rendezvous point, one step at a time. That night, alone in her room with only a thin wall separating her from Xander, Gwendolyn found her thoughts torn between hope for the future and fear of the confrontation to come. The evidence they'd found gave them a weapon against Harold, but wielding it would require courage and perfect timing. She was still awake when a soft knock came at the adjoining door. Opening it, she found Xander similarly sleepless, concern etched on his features. I couldn't rest, he admitted. Kept thinking about what Wainwright said regarding Elizabeth's caution. What if we're making the same mistake? Gathering evidence while Hart moves against us, Gwendolyn pulled him into her room, closing the door behind him. What alternative do we have? We need proof to fight him legally. We could leave, Xander suggested. Take the evidence we have and go somewhere he couldn't find us. California, Oregon, even further. The suggestion was tempting to simply flee, start fresh somewhere beyond Harold's reach, but Gwendolyn shook her head. He would find us eventually. And others would suffer in our place, the next woman he targets. Your sister left vulnerable at the ranch. No, we need to end this properly. Xander's shoulders sagged slightly as he recognized the truth in her words. I know, he broke off, eyes meeting hers. I can't lose you, Gwen, not now that I've found you. The raw emotion in his voice undid her final reservations. Gwendolyn stepped closer, her hands coming up to frame his face. You won't lose me. We'll face this together and we'll win. When their lips met this time, there was a new urgency, the desperate need to affirm life in the face of danger, to claim happiness while it was within reach. No longer held back by uncertainty or propriety, Gwendolyn surrendered to the feelings she'd denied for too long. I love you, she whispered against his mouth. Whatever happens, know that. His answer was to lift her into his arms, carrying her to the bed with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. That night, in the quiet privacy of a St. Louis hotel room, Gwendolyn finally understood what it meant to be truly loved, not possessed or controlled, but cherished for exactly who she was. Morning came with golden light filtering through lace curtains and Xander's arm draped protectively around her waist. For a moment, Gwendolyn allowed herself to imagine waking this way every day, safe, loved, content. Then reality intruded in the form of a knock at the outer door. Xander was instantly alert, reaching for his gun as Gwendolyn quickly donned a robe. Who is it? She called, delivery from Mr. Wainwright, came the response. They exchanged glances. The lawyer had promised the copies would arrive early, but caution was still warranted. Xander positioned himself beside the door, weapon ready, as Gwendolyn opened it just enough to see a young clerk holding a sealed package. After verifying the delivery and tipping the boy, they examined the package carefully before opening it. Inside were the promised copies, along with a note from Wainwright expressing his wishes for their success and offering further assistance should they require it. We should leave today, Xander said as they reviewed the documents. The sooner we reach the rendezvous point, the better, Gwendolyn agreed. Within hours, they had checked out of the hotel and boarded a westbound train, the precious evidence secured in a locked case that never left their possession. The return journey would take them through Kansas City again, then on to the small town of Cedar Ridge where they were to meet Margaret. As the train pulled away from St. Louis, Gwendolyn felt a strange mixture of dread and anticipation. They were moving back toward danger, yet also toward resolution. For the first time since fleeing Denver, she was no longer simply running from Harold, she was moving to confront him, armed with truth. The journey west was tense but uneventful. They changed trains in Kansas City without incident, though Xander insisted they remain in their compartment during the stopover, wary of Harold's men potentially watching the station. By the time they crossed into Colorado territory, both were exhausted from constant vigilance. Cedar Ridge was exactly the kind of unremarkable town they needed, small enough to notice strangers, large enough that 3 new arrivals wouldn't cause excessive curiosity. They took rooms at the only hotel, a clean if basic establishment run by a widow who asked few questions beyond how long they intended to stay. A few days, Xander told her. We're waiting for a business associate. Margaret had not yet arrived, which was not unexpected given the circuitous route she'd planned to take from Denver to avoid being followed. They settled in to wait, arranging a system where one of them would always remain with the evidence while the other kept watch or gathered supplies. 2 days passed with no sign of Margaret. On the 3rd morning, Gwendolyn was growing concerned. She should have been here by now, she fretted as they shared breakfast in her room. What if Harold discovered her intentions? Xander's expression was grim. We give her 1 more day. If she hasn't arrived by tomorrow, we proceed without her. That afternoon, Gwendolyn was alone in her room, Xander having gone to send a telegram to Grace updating her on their situation. She was reviewing Elizabeth's documents again, searching for any details they might have missed when a knock came at her door. Cautious as always, she approached silently. "Who is it?" "Telegraph for Mrs. Reed," came a young voice. Gwendolyn frowned. They were registered separately, not as husband and wife, and she had used her maiden name McIntyre. Alarm bells rang in her mind. "Slide it under the door, please," she called, reaching for the small revolver Xander had insisted she keep with her. There was a pause, then the sound of paper being pushed beneath the door. Gwendolyn waited until footsteps retreated before approaching. The envelope contained not a telegram but a hastily scrawled note. "Harold knows everything. Margaret arrested in Denver. Pinkertons closing in. Meet at the old church outside town immediately." Something about the note felt wrong. The handwriting wasn't Xander's, though it made a passable attempt, and Xander would never suggest separating from their evidence, nor would he choose an isolated meeting place. Heart pounding, Gwendolyn gathered the documents into their case and secured it to her body beneath her coat. Whatever was happening, she needed to find Xander immediately. If the note was a trap, he might also be in danger. She was about to leave when another knock came, 3 short taps followed by 2 longer ones. The signal she and Xander had established. Relief flooded her as she opened the door to find him there, though his expression quickly turned to concern as he took in her state. "What's happened?" he asked, entering and locking the door behind him. Gwendolyn showed him the fake note. Xander's face darkened as he read it. "They're here," he said simply. "We need to leave now." "What about Margaret?" "I just received a genuine telegram from Grace. Margaret never returned to Denver. She was last seen boarding a train to Chicago following Harold." The implications were clear. Either Margaret had betrayed them, or she had been captured and possibly forced to reveal their plans. Either way, their position was compromised. They slipped out through the hotel's back entrance, avoiding the lobby where strangers might be watching. Xander had already secured horses, anticipating the need for a quick departure. As they mounted up, he outlined a change of plans. "We'll head directly to the territorial capital. Sheriff Donovan arranged for us to meet with Governor Pitkin himself. If we can get these documents into his hands, Hart's connections in Denver won't matter." It was a desperate gambit, but with Pinkertons closing in and their ally possibly compromised, they had few options left. They rode hard through the afternoon, taking back trails rather than the main road, constantly vigilant for pursuit. As dusk fell, they were forced to stop in a small grove of cottonwoods near a creek. The horses needed rest, and pushing on in darkness through unfamiliar territory would be foolhardy. "We'll take turns keeping watch," Xander said as they made a cold camp, unwilling to risk a fire that might attract attention. 4 hours each. At first light, we ride again." Gwendolyn nodded, exhaustion evident in the droop of her shoulders. The adrenaline that had sustained her was fading, leaving bone-deep weariness in its wake. Still, when Xander offered to take first watch, she refused. "You've barely slept in days," she insisted. "Rest now. I'll wake you if anything happens." Reluctantly, he agreed, settling against a tree trunk with his rifle across his lap, seemingly asleep almost instantly, though she knew he would wake at the slightest disturbance. As night deepened around them, Gwendolyn kept vigil, the case of documents a reassuring weight against her side. So much had changed since that evening outside the Redemption Springs saloon. She had transformed from a desperate fugitive into a woman determined to reclaim justice and her future. And at the center of that transformation was the man sleeping nearby, the cowboy who had seen worth in her when she couldn't see it herself. Her watch passed uneventfully. The night sounds of the wilderness a soothing backdrop to her thoughts. When the time came to wake Xander, she felt almost reluctant to disturb his rest. She touched his shoulder gently. "Your turn," she whispered. He came awake instantly, blue eyes clear despite the brief sleep. "All quiet, not even a coyote," she confirmed. "I'll rest now." Xander pulled her close for a moment, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Just a few more days," he murmured. "Then this will all be over." Gwendolyn settled into the space he had vacated, still warm from his body, and closed her eyes. Despite the hard ground and uncertain future, she slept soundly, comforted by Xander's steady presence nearby. Dawn broke with a chill mist rising from the creek. They ate a cold breakfast of jerky and hardtack, packed quickly, and were mounted before the sun had fully cleared the horizon. According to Xander's calculations, they could reach the territorial capital by nightfall if they maintained a steady pace. The morning passed without incident as they traveled through increasingly rugged terrain, deliberately choosing a route less likely to be watched. By midday, Gwendolyn was beginning to hope they had successfully evaded pursuit. It was as they descended into a narrow valley that disaster struck. The crack of a rifle shot echoed off the surrounding hills, followed by Xander's sharp cry of pain. His horse reared in panic as he clutched his left arm, blood seeping between his fingers. "Ride," he shouted to Gwendolyn, drawing his revolver with his good hand. "Keep going." Instead, she wheeled her horse toward him, reaching for the reins of his mount to steady it. "Not without you." Another shot kicked up dirt near their horse's hooves. Xander managed to control his animal long enough to spot the shooter's position on a ridge to their right. "There," he said, raising his revolver and firing twice in quick succession. A cry of pain suggested at least one shot had found its mark. "How many?" Gwendolyn asked, scanning the ridgeline. "At least 2, maybe more," Xander replied grimly. "We need cover." They spurred their horses toward a cluster of boulders at the far end of the valley, bullets whining past them as they rode. Reaching the shelter of the rocks, they dismounted hastily, Xander wincing as the movement jarred his wounded arm. "Let me see," Gwendolyn insisted, already tearing a strip from her petticoat to use as a bandage. The bullet had passed clean through the fleshy part of his upper arm, painful but not immediately life-threatening. She bound it tightly to stem the bleeding, her fingers moving with surprising steadiness despite the danger. "We're pinned down," Xander said, peering cautiously around the edge of a boulder. "They have the high ground and cover." Gwendolyn assessed their situation. The boulder cluster offered protection, but also trapped them in place. The only exit was back the way they had come, directly into their attackers' line of fire, or forward along a narrow path that climbed the opposite ridge, a route that would leave them exposed during the ascent. "Who are they?" she asked. "Pinkertons?" "Probably," Xander agreed, "professional judging by their positions and tactics." A voice called out from the ridgeline, confirming their suspicions. "Mrs. Hart, Mr. Reed, there's no need for further bloodshed. Surrender now and come with us peacefully." "And if we refuse?" Xander shouted back. "Then I'm authorized to bring Mrs. Hart back by any means necessary," came the cold reply. "Your continued existence is not required, Reed." Gwendolyn's blood ran cold at the casual threat. These men had orders to kill Xander if he interfered, exactly as Margaret had warned. "We need a distraction," she whispered. "Something to draw their fire while one of us makes a break for it." Xander shook his head firmly. "I'm not leaving you, not you," she clarified. "Me. I'll take the evidence and make for the capital while you keep them occupied." "Absolutely not," he hissed. "That's suicide, Gwen. No more than both of us dying here," she argued. "You're wounded. One of us needs to get these documents to the governor. You said yourself it's our only chance." Xander's expression was agonized. "I can't let you, it's not your choice," she interrupted gently. "This started with me. Let me finish it." Before he could protest further, the attackers opened fire again, a barrage that chipped stone fragments from their shelter and forced them lower. When the shooting paused, Gwendolyn seized her chance. "Give me your spare revolver," she demanded. "And your horse, he's faster than mine." Xander held her gaze for a long moment, conflict evident in his eyes. Then, with reluctant admiration, he passed her his backup weapon. "You'll need a diversion. When I start firing, count to 20, then go. Stay low in the saddle and don't stop for anything." Gwendolyn nodded, checking both revolvers and securing the case of documents more firmly. "I'll get through," she promised, "and I'll send help back for you." "Gwen," Xander said, catching her arm as she prepared to move. "I love you, remember that, whatever happens." She kissed him fiercely, pouring all her emotion into the brief contact. "And I love you, wait for me." Without giving herself time for second thoughts, she moved to where their horses were tethered, ready to mount at her signal. Xander positioned himself at the edge of their shelter, revolver in hand. "Last chance, Reed," the Pinkerton called. "Send Mrs. Hart out now." Instead of replying, Xander began firing rapidly, aiming at the muzzle flashes that revealed the attackers' positions. The distraction worked all attention and return fire focused on his location. Gwendolyn counted silently, each number a heartbeat. At 20, she swung into Xander's saddle and spurred the horse forward, bent low over its neck as they raced along the narrow path up the opposite ridge. Behind her, the gunfire intensified as Xander maintained his covering barrage. A bullet whined past her ear as at least one of the attackers noticed her escape. Another struck the ground ahead, throwing up dirt that momentarily blinded her. But the horse, well-trained and responsive, never faltered in its upward climb. Reaching the crest of the ridge, Gwendolyn risked a glance back. Xander had repositioned to a more exposed vantage point, deliberately drawing fire to himself to cover her retreat. Even at a distance, she could see fresh blood staining his shirt, another wound. Tears blurred her vision as she urged the horse onward. She was abandoning him to face their pursuers alone, possibly sacrificing the man she loved to save herself and their evidence. The knowledge was a physical pain in her chest, sharper than any bullet. But she rode on because he had asked it of her, because their cause demanded it, because love sometimes meant making impossible choices. As the sounds of gunfire faded behind her, Gwendolyn silently vowed that if she survived this day, she would find her way back to Xander Reed or avenge him. The territorial capital was a bustling town of brick buildings and wide streets, a stark contrast to the wilderness Gwendolyn had traversed for the past grueling hours. She arrived as dusk was falling, her horse lathered with exertion, her own appearance so disheveled that she drew startled looks from passers-by. Finding the governor's residence was simple enough, a handsome mansion on a hill overlooking the town. Getting past the guards at the gate proved more challenging, especially in her current state. The governor isn't receiving visitors, a stern-faced man informed her. Especially not at this hour. This is a matter of life and death, Gwendolyn insisted. Please, I must speak with Governor Pitkin immediately. Sheriff Donovan of Redemption Springs sent me. I have evidence of corruption and murder involving one of Denver's most prominent citizens. The mention of Donovan's name caused a flicker of recognition, but the guard remained unmoved. Leave your information with me, and I'll ensure it reaches the appropriate authorities. Desperation made Gwendolyn bold. And if those authorities are among the corrupted, no, sir, I will speak directly to the governor or no one at all. Lives depend on it, including that of a man who may be dying while we debate protocols. Something in her manner, the combination of determination and genuine fear, finally penetrated the guard's professional detachment. After a brief consultation with his colleague, he escorted her to a side entrance of the mansion. Wait here, he instructed. I'll inform the governor's secretary of your arrival. What followed was an agonizing half-hour of waiting in an austere anteroom, clutching the case of documents like a lifeline. Each passing minute increased her fear for Xander. Was he still alive? Had the Pinkertons captured him? Or worse? Finally, a door opened and a distinguished man in his 50s appeared. I understand you bring a matter of some urgency, he said, studying her with keen eyes. I am Governor Pitkin, and you are Gwendolyn Hart, sir, she replied, rising to her feet, or rather, Gwendolyn McIntyre. I've come regarding my husband, Harold Hart of Denver, and the crimes he's committed, including, I believe, the murder of his first wife. The governor's eyebrows rose, but he gestured for her to follow him into a private study. This is quite an accusation, Mrs. Hart. I assume you have evidence to support such claims? Gwendolyn placed the case on his desk and quickly outlined the events of the past months, her discovery of Harold's embezzlement, her flight, the evidence Elizabeth had gathered, and finally, the ambush that had possibly cost Xander his life. As she spoke, Governor Pitkin examined the documents with increasing gravity. When she finished, he looked up with a new respect in his eyes. These records, he said, tapping Elizabeth's meticulous notes, implicate not only your husband but several officials in Denver who have been suspected of corruption for some time. This is precisely the evidence we've needed to take action. He paused, studying her face. You've taken extraordinary risks to bring this forward, Mrs. Hart. The territory owes you a debt of gratitude. I don't want gratitude, Gwendolyn said firmly. I want justice for Elizabeth, for Harold's other victims, and for Xander Reed. Please, sir, he may still be alive. If you could send men to search for him, of course, the governor assured her. I'll dispatch the territorial militia immediately. Where exactly did this ambush occur? Gwendolyn described the location as precisely as she could, her voice breaking as she recounted leaving Xander behind. Governor Pitkin listened attentively, then summoned an aide to relay orders for a search party. In the meantime, he continued, we must ensure your safety. Hart will soon learn his schemes have been exposed and he may become desperate. I'll arrange secure accommodations and protection until this matter is resolved. The following days passed in a blur of activity. Harold was arrested in Chicago, where he had fled upon learning of the evidence against him. Several Denver officials were similarly detained, their web of corruption unraveling rapidly once the first thread was pulled. Margaret Thornton was found in a Chicago hotel, not a betrayer as they had feared, but another victim drugged and held captive by her brother's associates to prevent her testimony. Once recovered, she provided additional damning evidence against Harold. Throughout it all, Gwendolyn remained under guard in a small but comfortable house near the governor's mansion, waiting for news of Xander. Search parties had found the site of the ambush with evidence of a fierce gunfight, blood stains, spent cartridges, and 3 bodies identified as Pinkerton agents. But of Xander himself, there was no sign. He could have escaped, Grace insisted during her daily visits, having traveled to the capital as soon as she received word of the events. X is resourceful. If anyone could survive, it's him. Gwendolyn clung to this hope, refusing to believe that the man who had taught her to trust again could be lost. Each day without news, however, chipped away at her resolve. It was on the 6th day after her arrival at the capital that everything changed. Gwendolyn was sitting in the small garden behind her temporary home, listlessly turning the pages of a book, when the guard at the gate called out a challenge. State your business. I'm looking for Gwendolyn McIntyre, came a familiar voice, weak but unmistakable. I believe she's expecting me. Gwendolyn was on her feet and running before consciousness fully registered what she'd heard. There, leaning heavily on a walking stick, his left arm in a sling and his face gaunt with exhaustion, stood Xander Reed. You're alive, she breathed, stopping just short of throwing herself into his arms, afraid of worsening his injuries. Xander's smile, though strained, held all the warmth she remembered. Told you I'd wait for you, he said softly. The guard, recognizing the emotional moment, tactfully withdrew to his post, leaving them alone in the garden. How? Gwendolyn asked, gently leading Xander to a bench where they could sit together. We searched everywhere. Seems I have 9 lives, he replied, wincing slightly as he settled beside her. Took 2 more bullets during the fight. Would have been the end of me, but a hunting party from a nearby Ute settlement heard the gunfire. They found me unconscious and took me to their camp. The Ute saved you. Gwendolyn marveled. Relations between settlers and the native tribes were often tense in the territory. Xander nodded. Their medicine man patched me up best he could. Fever kept me under for days. When I finally came around, I convinced them to bring me here. His hand found hers, fingers intertwining. All I could think about was getting back to you, making sure you were safe. Tears spilled down Gwendolyn's cheeks as the full weight of his return hit her. I thought I'd lost you, she whispered, that I'd left you to die. You did exactly what I asked, he assured her, and it worked. The evidence reached the governor, Hart's being brought to justice, and we're both still breathing. His thumb brushed away her tears. That's a victory worth celebrating. In the days that followed, as Xander regained his strength and Harold's case progressed through the legal system, Gwendolyn found herself contemplating a future that had once seemed impossible. With her husband facing charges that would likely keep him imprisoned for the rest of his natural life, she could begin the process of legally dissolving their marriage. Governor Pitkin grateful for her role in exposing the corruption, had promised his personal assistance in expediting the divorce proceedings. "Consider it the territory's way of thanking you," he told her. "Few would have shown such courage in the face of such powerful enemies." 1 month after Harold's arrest, as autumn painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Gwendolyn received official notice that her marriage had been annulled on grounds of fraud and criminal behavior. She was legally Gwendolyn McIntyre, once more free to determine her own future. That evening, Xander took her for a walk along the river that ran through the capital city. His wounds were healing well, the sling abandoned though he still favored his left arm. As they watched the sunset reflect on the water, he turned to face her. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. "The ranch is waiting whenever we're ready to return. Grace has been managing things, but she says the place isn't the same without us." Gwendolyn smiled at the casual us, the easy way he included her in his vision of home. "Is that an invitation, Mr. Reed?" "It's whatever you want it to be," he replied, echoing words spoken in a train compartment that felt like a lifetime ago. "The choice is yours, Gwen, always yours." She considered the question seriously. The past months had transformed her from a desperate fugitive into a woman of remarkable strength and purpose. She had options now: could return to her family in the East, use her newfound fame to advocate for women's legal protections, even start her own business with the settlement she would eventually receive from Harold's estate. But as she looked at Xander, she knew with perfect clarity what she wanted most. "I want to go home," she said simply. "To Redemption Springs, to the ranch, to you and Grace and the life we began building before all this happened." She stepped closer, resting her hands on his chest. "I want to wake up each morning knowing I'm exactly where I belong with the people I love." Joy bloomed across Xander's features. From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet pouch. "I was hoping you'd say that," he admitted, opening it to reveal a simple gold ring set with a single pearl. "It was my mother's. Grace insisted I take it before coming to find you." Gwendolyn caught her breath as he dropped to one knee before her, heedless of the curious glances from passers-by. "Gwendolyn McIntyre," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion shining in his eyes, "will you marry me? Not because you need protection or a home, but because I love you and want to spend the rest of my days showing you just how deserving of love you truly are." "Yes," she whispered, tears of happiness blurring her vision as he slipped the ring onto her finger. "Yes, I will marry you, Xander Reed." As he rose to kiss her, the setting sun bathed them in golden light, a fitting backdrop to the beginning of their new life together. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the territorial capital, with Grace, Sheriff Donovan, and Governor Pitkin among the witnesses. Margaret Thornton attended as well, her testimony having been crucial in ensuring Harold's conviction. "You saved me as much as I helped you," Margaret told Gwendolyn at the reception. "For years, I enabled Harold's behavior out of misguided loyalty. Now I can finally begin atoning for that mistake." As winter approached, the newlyweds returned to Redemption Springs and the ranch that had become sanctuary to them both. The town welcomed them as heroes, the story of their confrontation with Harold Hart having spread throughout the territory. The ranch house, under Grace's care, had been expanded with a new wing, a wedding gift for the couple that gave them privacy while maintaining the family connection that was so important to them all. Grace herself had become engaged to the town's doctor, a development that delighted her brother. "Seems love is contagious around here," Xander remarked as they settled into their new life together. "Next thing you know, even Sheriff Donovan will be courting someone." The winter passed in peaceful contentment as they adjusted to married life and planned for the ranch's future. Spring brought new calves, expanded gardens, and the news that Gwendolyn was expecting their first child, a daughter who would be born in the autumn. "She'll be strong like her mother," Xander predicted, his hand resting protectively over Gwendolyn's growing belly as they sat on the porch one summer evening, watching fireflies dance above the meadow. "And stubborn like her father," Gwendolyn countered with a smile. "Poor Grace will have her hands full as an aunt." Their daughter, Elizabeth Grace Reed, arrived on a crisp October day, nearly a year to the date since Gwendolyn had first stumbled into Xander's life outside that Redemption Springs saloon. With her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit, she became the center of their world, the living embodiment of the love that had grown between them against all odds. As the years passed, the Reed Ranch prospered. Xander's innovative breeding programs and Gwendolyn's shrewd business sense transformed it into one of the most successful operations in the territory. They added to their family a son 2 years after Elizabeth, and twins, a boy and girl, 3 years after that. Harold Hart died in prison before their eldest child turned 5, taking his bitterness and cruelty to the grave. The news brought Gwendolyn not joy, but a quiet sense of closure, the final chapter of a dark period in her life firmly shut. On their 10th wedding anniversary, as they watched their children playing in the yard that had once seemed so foreign to a city-bred banker's wife, Xander wrapped his arms around Gwendolyn from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. "About the path that brought you here?" Gwendolyn turned in his embrace to face him, studying the face that had become so dear to her, still handsome despite the new lines around his eyes, still capable of making her heart race with a single look. "Not one," she answered truthfully. "Every step, even the painful ones, led me to you. How could I regret that?" Xander smiled, the same smile that had first given her hope when she believed herself beyond redemption. "Remember what you said that night in the kitchen, that you didn't deserve love." "I remember your answer more clearly," she replied, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw. "That you would love me until I believed otherwise. And do you believe it now?" Gwendolyn's answer was in her kiss, confident, passionate, filled with the certainty of a woman who knew her own worth and the depth of the love she both gave and received. When they finally parted, breathless despite the years of familiarity, her eyes shone with the truth he had helped her discover. "I do," she said simply. "Thanks to you, I finally do.